Black, Part 2. That was always the thing with the bad guy, of course. The bad guy felt Phoenix needed to go without, and so the bad guy always reinforced this. There was much that Phoenix did not deserve, according to the bad guy, and that was why Phoenix didn't have any money. That was why he was poor. That was why at times Phoenix had no hope. Phoenix didn't know where he was going, and yet he did know. He was going to lobby for rights. For gay rights, for instance, or rights of the poor, or the rights of those who suffered with mental illness and or addiction. The government had been cracking down on outsiders and atypical people alike, those on the fringe, and Phoenix was feeling the blow. Phoenix's rights were even more limited now than they had ever been, and this was saying something. Phoenix was being trampled on by the government because nobody cared about what he thought. Nobody cared about what he felt was the right thing. Phoenix didn't know why the government was so hostile to people like him, hating the poor, hating those who were different yet unique, those who were ostracized and on the margins, yet thinking about it in that light didn't change anything, because now it was a fact of life. So Phoenix continued to walk. He continued to walk down the State Street and through the strange religious mall he was at, and he didn't know where he was going to end up, but he was open to the possibilities, he was open to anything and everything. Life was still beautiful, even if Phoenix did not always believe that himself, and even if things got really hard sometimes. There was his existence, the things that he longed to understand about himself, but there was also the joy of philosophy and politics, and Phoenix was not going to be afraid. So he continued to walk down the street that cut through everything like a knife, cutting right through the heart of the city, and this was a fitting metaphor for where Phoenix was and where he often ended up. Phoenix was a sword. He was indeed thinking about the way that religion destroyed things, but also created things. Perhaps this was the paradox of religion, was that it would give you hope while also telling you what to believe, coercing you. It seemed as though the place that Phoenix was at, the city, was very religious, and this was made clear by the buildings surrounding him. Phoenix did not feel welcome here. Religion was often corporate and often benefited from blind servitude and the oppression of outsiders. Phoenix did not want to be so scathing about what he perceived, but Phoenix was never going to benefit from religious structures, because they would tell him that he just needed to believe in God, and that everything would be okay, even though he was malnourished, even though he needed medicine, even though he was sick. At least in a manner of speaking, because Phoenix was actually doing okay for the moment, and that was good. Phoenix didn't want to be here, but he forced himself to continue to walk through all of this, and he felt left out. Boy, did he feel left out. But he knew that he was going to arrive at his destination soon enough, so he sang to one of his favorite songs, and he powered through it, and he continued to walk down the street, and he began to go up a small hill. As he walked up the hill, he thought about what his life meant, as he looked at all the fallen fall leaves on the ground and the shade from the trees. He honestly wasn't sure, and maybe there was something that he couldn't know, no matter how hard it was to not know. But if religion and capitalism took over the world, then perhaps there really was no place for the outsiders and for the anarchists and for the street kids. This was the way that it always seemed to be, and Phoenix was used to this, though sometimes he wished that he could have good food and he wished that he could have money so he could buy the things that he needed. But Phoenix was poor, and he was never going to get the things that he needed, not in this society, which was why he continued, because he needed to lobby hard for fellow street kids. So Phoenix pushed himself. He got up the hill, and then he saw that he was right there, right at the Capitol. It was confusing that he was here of all places, because it wasn't like anyone was going to listen to him. It wasn't like anyone cared where he was at. It was just kind of how these things were. But he nonetheless forced himself to go up, and he realized that he was wearing a black shirt, and he wished that he was barefoot, and he wished that he could be someone cool and attractive, a cool gay guy maybe. When Phoenix realized this, he decided to go for it. He took off his shoes, he would come back and collect them later, and he walked even closer to the state capitol until he was on the lawn. He still had his notebook, and now he had a copy of the book Maniac Magee, and that was really cool and beautiful. He began to write. He was going to do this. He was Phoenix. So he wrote a poem in his notebook, thinking about all of the things that he had experienced, and somehow making them concise in one moment and in one poem. Maniac Magee. He didn't know what else to expect. He didn't know what his life was supposed to mean, but maybe this was a good thing. It was relaxing writing on the lawn of this beautiful building and thinking about the strength of homeless kids, and he knew that this was in the future going to be a very happy memory, even though he felt all of the chaos surrounding him. Phoenix needed to be okay. He needed to understand that he was all right, which was why he continued to write. And when he was finished, he got up, dusted himself off, and walked up towards the building of the rich and the wealthy, and holding a book that he loved very much, and his own notebook. He walked inside. He didn't understand why the building was open to him, but he decided to run with it. So he continued to move through it, move through all of it, and it was a nice building. He had never been in here before, and even though it was representative of the wealthy and powerful, he knew that he was going to express himself and express himself well. It was time to lobby. It was time to process. "Can I help you find anything?" came a voice. Phoenix turned and he saw an officer, but this officer was nice. This officer was in fact encouraging. Phoenix thought, did this guy like his black shirt? Did he like his shirt? Did he like his clothes as though they were shadows? Phoenix wasn't sure, so he said, "The president is cracking down on us. I'm gay, and the world will not accept this. The world wants to destroy me, and I don't know why. It really sucks. Do you like my shirt?" The officer looked a little bit confused, perplexed by Phoenix's complexity and perplexity of thought, but he was compassionate, and he was listening, so Phoenix continued. "There really isn't a place in the world for people like me, as I know. I wish that I could work with kids for my job to make a living, but I am penniless and jobless and ungrateful, and kids would never understand me, and I would never be able to give kids what they deserve. If I worked with kids, I would just make their lives worse. And that wouldn't make sense, in fact. That would be cruel and horrible. I would just make their lives worse because of my chaos and intensity. People wouldn't understand. That is just a fact of life. I am humble and kind, and that isn't good enough for kids." The officer was empathetic, and his facial expression seemed to say that Phoenix was being too hard on himself. Phoenix was always too hard on himself, but Phoenix had been crushed by the world, and this was something that everybody knew. Everybody, including those who didn't really know Phoenix. Phoenix was always going to be crushed, because that was his punishment. That was his inferno and his purgatory. The beautiful thing about Phoenix and his situation, though, was that he was also beautiful, and people cared about him for his beauty, his character, his goodness, and that was good. People didn't realize this, but he had friends, and his friends were there for him. Always. His friends were there, and they weren't going to give up on him. Because Phoenix deserved a lot, if only Phoenix realized this for himself. But he seemingly did not, because he was crushed by the world, and because that didn't change. Phoenix continued to talk to the officer. He said that he hurt, and that he wished that he was a better person, and that he wished things weren't so destructive. Phoenix was lobbying for the rights of those who were misunderstood and marginalized and ostracized, and Phoenix knew that he was on hunger strike, not just because he didn't have access to food, but also because he wanted the kids in the world to understand they were loved, and they deserved better food, and that he was going to lobby for them, so they would be nourished like God would have wanted. He did this with his hunger strike, his protest, because Phoenix cared. But Phoenix was feeling sad, and he was feeling overwhelmed, and he didn't know how long he could do this. So he looked at the officer, smiled, and he decided that he was going to go far, far away. There was nothing he could do about the way that the world was. This was something that was out of his control. So he smiled at the officer, and then walked out, able to have lobbied and to go on his hunger strike for the kids of the world, and all the kids of the world, to no longer starve, to no longer suffer. There was a bus just a little ways away. Phoenix went to the bus, and not really knowing what to expect or where he was going, he held onto his book and onto his notebook, alive and barefoot and cool, and he walked towards the bus and got inside. The bus driver didn't say anything to him. Phoenix went to the back of the bus, sat down on the bench, smiled to himself like a kid, and he closed his eyes, and he fell asleep instantly, and all he saw was the darkness, his black dreams.